And this third and final talk in the series is where we really go off into airy fairyland and we talk almost entirely about conceptual things. And the purpose of this talk is to try to help you understand how a really good CTO thinks. There are two reasons why you'd be interested in that. Number one, you're a CTO. You want to hear my version of that, either to prove to me that I'm a complete idiot. I'm always happy for that to happen. Scientific method, disprove my hypothesis, and I'm glad, right? Or you think you might learn something. Both good outcomes. The alternative scenario is you're a CEO or somebody else like that on the board, an investor, whatever, and you'd like to know, how the hell do I spot a really good CTO? How do I know that this one is good and that one's actually probably rubbish? And what are the distinctions that I need to draw? Because obviously that's going to be a spectrum. It's not a clear-cut thing. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 35 minutes or so is about that. And again, just like in the first talk, I'm not going to be giving you any fish here, right? This is all about how to think this way, not very specific things what to do. So again, none of this stuff, that's not what we're doing here today. Think like a CTO, what does that mean? At its most fundamental level, it's about pattern recognition. Your CTO, whoever that is, their primary job is to be able to understand the question why. Why? Why are we doing things? Why should I choose that technology over this technology? Why is this a good choice and that one a bad one? Why is that business model easy to implement and this one not? Why? Other people working for the CTO ideally, or he or she themselves when they put on another hat, can then talk about the how. But the CTO function as a role is about the why. And it's about spotting the deep patterns that underlie the things happening around us. Now, ideally, everybody on your C-level team should be functioning this way, right? All I'm talking about today is the CTO, but on some level, this applies equally applicably to your CEO, to your CMO, and whoever else is kind of your senior leadership team. They should all be functioning this way. Why? Because being able to see those deep patterns gives you power. When Neo was finally able to see the matrix in this manner, he was able to dodge bullets, he was able to reach into the matrix and manipulate it in a manner that no one else could. That's really what you're trying to do as a startup, isn't it? You're trying to be Neo. It's the Barclays of the world that are content to simply have dinner with the woman in the red dress. That's not what you want to do. You want to do this. To do that, you have to learn to think a certain way. And I find it really helpful when I'm trying to learn a new thing to understand what I'm probably doing wrong already and try to unlearn it. And as a pedagogical thing, that's also a useful thing. Why? It kind of opens your brain up, makes you more receptive to the new things that we might want to talk about. So here's the wrong thing that we're going to focus on that you're probably doing, particularly if you're a geek. Who's heard this term before? The map is not the territory. So this is a very famous saying, but very few people actually understand, I think, the full implications of this. First articulated by that chap whose name I won't try to pronounce, sometime in the 30s. He's a Polish philosopher. And it basically means this. This is not London. That seems really bloody obvious, but there are really subtle implications to it. For example, if you understand on a deep level that this is not London, as a native often does, you will know, for example, that there are places on this map where you can walk between 2 points on it in 3 minutes, but if you take the tube, it takes 30. Because the map is not the territory. If it was a map that actually was completely 100% accurate, fidelity is the term people use in cartography, to the thing it was trying to map, it would be the thing it was trying to map. That's the philosophical aspect of it, right? The closer you get to being a 100% accurate map, the closer you get to being the thing itself. And that's true of every model that we draw of anything. When we draw a model, we're trying to abstract some essential essence out of something and make it tractable, useful to us, because we can't deal with the entirety of a thing. That makes real easy sense when you're talking about the tube map in London. But boy, do geeks fall for this trap all the time. This is a map. This is a map typical of the kinds of maps that you will see of software. This is not the software. Your software is not a set of boxes and arrows with web servers and load balancers and database servers and application servers. This is a map. Why is that bad? Why is getting that distinction wrong dangerous? The thing in the upper left-hand corner is a kind of a depiction of a concept that in software architecture sometimes gets referred to as a hairball. And we as engineers are traditionally trained to think of hairballs as bad things, kind of a creeping horror that we're constantly fighting off. And whenever we see manifestations of hairballness, we go back to that picture and we try to tidy them up. We rationalize them, we reduce redundancies, we clean it up, and we try to make it look more like that tidy picture. And we're doing that because we've lost sight of the fact that the map is not the thing itself. And losing sight of it can be very dangerous. Why did I pick this particular picture of a hairball? Anybody know? Know what it is? Any guesses? The what? The brain. That's a good guess, and you'll see a picture of a brain in a second because of its similarity to this. It looks very organic, doesn't it? It looks like neurons firing, but it's not. No. That's not a coincidence, I don't think. Connections between people? In a way, yes. What this is a fairly old picture, late 90s, so it's completely outdated. The actual picture now would be much more complicated and difficult to draw, of the World Wide Web. So why did I pick that out? What am I trying to tell you? People, again, facepalm. The World Wide Web is the human species' most successful system integration project ever. It is arguably the most significant piece of software architecture ever. If we could observe it in the same manner that we do the Great Wall of China from the International Space Station, it would have that same magnitude. It's a big freaking deal. It doesn't look anything like that neat and tidy map with boxes and arrows on it. It looks like a hairball. And yet, it's fucking great. Many things that are of deep and profound significance do not look anything like the maps that we as software engineers are conditioned to draw and are conditioned to think are how our software is supposed to look, including, to your point, the thing that we carry around in our skulls. I have a friend, he works at Andreessen Horowitz. His job title there is the very cool philosopher in residence. His name is Venkatesh Rao, and he's just done a tremendous piece of work called Breaking Smart. It's a book, but he published it on the web. If you don't know that term and you haven't heard of it, Google it now and make a note to go read that stuff later. Breaking Smart, 2 words, Venkat Rao. Venkat once told me in a conversation, Mark, you know why people do this? You know why they draw these maps and think that's the thing? It's because we as a species have this thing that's like a taxonomic urge. It's because of, you know, evolution and stuff. On the savannah back in the day, we needed it to survive, to make sense of all these bewildering things happening around us. Walking around here at slush, man, all you want to do is simplify because there's too many damn people, too much smoke, and it's too dark. In Western culture, this is kind of idealized in Platonic forms, Plato and stuff like that. And it's a core part of what we're taught in school, trained to think and do anyway in terms of biological hardware. But it leads to dramatic anti-patterns, like thinking that hairballs are inherently bad and not a neutral thing to be evaluated of their own merits. More importantly, if you're not aware of the underlying patterns of things like this, and you're in denial about them, then you're exposing yourself to this risk. So there's a guy in this picture, right? And he's going, I think the way I get a cab is fine. Cabs work good. I'm all right with cabs. And there's another guy in this picture going, fuck no. And he invents Uber. So you can either be the guy with his arm on the ground going, you know what, cabs are all right, cabs work all right. Or you can be the guy who thinks, no, I'm going to step outside the matrix. I see a gap and I'm going to exploit it. And that starts by being aware of things that you're probably doing wrong, like the map territory relation. So let's talk about some tools that you can use to help kind of free your mind in a Neo-like sense. This is a thing called the risk exposure formula. Have you ever seen it before? It's taught in places like MBA courses in major universities, but it's also used in places like nuclear power plants where they do audits of the security there with it. I first encountered it in IT security. And it's actually pretty simple. So you've got a thing that could happen, whatever it is. And there are negative consequences to it happening or not happening. It depends on which way you turn your head and look at it. That has a particular cost and a particular likelihood. You multiply the cost times the likelihood, and you get the risk exposure that that thing represents. Why is that interesting? Well, things on the left-hand side having to do with the likelihood of failure are all about trying to prevent bad things from happening. And those are the platonic things. Those are the things that we're trained in, taught at school. Those are the things that are the easiest typically for people, particularly in the West, to understand. Anytime you do one of these, anytime you do an estimate, a plan, anytime you do a business model, draw a canvas, anytime you make a guess about anything, you are typically doing something to try to lower the likelihood of failure in some risk exposure formula, whether you know that that's what you're doing or not. The risk exposure formula is the underlying matrix that you're operating in. And when you do things like this, you're trying to drive the likelihood of failure down. The likelihood of failure side of the equation has a caveat, and it's a rather significant one. And it's this: it's never zero. Not ever. Dude wrote a whole book about this. It's called The Black Swan. Ever heard of that? The whole point of that is things will happen. That's just how the laws of physics work. So the likelihood is never zero. It's always higher than that. The best you can do is drive it as low as you can. Why is that a problem? Well, if you're dealing with an overall risk equation where the cost of failure is very high, then any equation where the likelihood is non-zero, and they always are, is eventually going to lead to this. Nobody thought that blimps would ever crash, but when one did, in New Jersey, not too far from where I was born, it ended an entire industry because the cost of failure was so high relative to the likelihood of it. How can you use that insight? Why is that important for your startup? Well, let's focus on the other side of the equation for a minute. This is about reducing the cost of failure. Think about how that works. Imagine you've got a refrigerator, and your refrigerator has some lifetime before it breaks, right? Before it goes obsolete. What happens if there's some way that I could make that refrigerator simply spawn itself again, reproduce, as soon as it breaks, and you just get a new one? What would happen if that could happen so fast that you never even noticed that it had broken? What would happen if, when the Black Knight gets his arm cut off, he doesn't have to deny that that's happened? He can just go, "That's all right, man. I'm going to grow a new one." Growing a new one reduces the cost of failure. And at that point, the Black Knight could literally wade into battle and let people chop his arms off willy-nilly because he knows, hey, I'm just going to grow a new one. And the only thing now left in his business model to work out is, how fast can I grow a new one, man? In IT engineering, this concept of RAID was a seminal thing, redundant array of independent disks, that enabled the internet, and it completely eviscerated the mainframe market by using this drop in the cost of failure. In organizational design, it's this book. This book is about driving down the cost of failure. Why? Anytime you see things like shorter feedback loops, shorter cycles, smaller batches, anytime you hear a buzzword like lean, agile, anytime you look at a thing that has to do with cloud computing, you are looking at a thing that is about driving the cost of failure down, not the likelihood. Why is that important to you? Well, in classic engineering terms, we tend to use these buzzwords: mean time to recovery and mean time to failure. If your mean time to recovery is 3 nanoseconds, your mean time to failure is no longer relevant. The cost of failure side of the equation is much more powerful, and it drives all kinds of things around you that you're probably not really aware of, like this. See, back in the old days when I had to buy all my hardware and things, I needed this really long, slow process with lots of checks and balances and milestones and gates, because all I could do to mitigate my overall risk exposure was try to keep the likelihood of failure down. But when technology accelerated things underneath my feet, the cost of failure dropped dramatically, and all of a sudden, if I was clever, I could step outside the matrix and go, actually, all that crap is overhead now. I don't need to do any of that. I can collapse my dev and my ops together. We can move much faster, and guess what? We will outcompete those big old behemoths that haven't figured this out yet. This is a cost of failure phenomenon. And what you need to be doing as a CEO, as a CTO, is learning to think, to see these things in this manner, because this is how you exploit them. One more way of looking at it, and then I'll stop beating this dead horse to merrily mix my metaphors. Biologists refer to the left-hand side of the formula as being robust. An organism that is optimally evolved for its niche is robust. The thing is, that's an alpha predator. They're absolute king where they are, but as soon as their environment begins to change around them, as soon as the context changes, as soon as the thing that they're evolved optimally for is no longer there, the ice melts, they die. They are what Nassim Taleb refers to as fragile. Things on the other side of the equation, biologists refer to that as adaptability. Sometimes you'll hear resilience used in this word, but on a biological level, it's more about adaptability. Guess who was a big fan of the right-hand side of the equation? You know, the guy that thought it up. Adaptability always triumphs. So as a lean, scrappy, resource-strapped startup, this is the side you need to be focused on. And this is a tool to help you see it and make those choices in your own business. Wrote a whole nother book about it called Anti-Fragility. Hard book to read. Nassim is not a great author, but if you can slog your way through it, I recommend it. Opens up a whole nother can of worms, so let's talk briefly about some of those. Who's heard of this term? Chaos monkey. Who knows what it is? One hand. How many people watch Netflix? While you're watching Netflix, on your television, in production, Netflix is breaking things. They're deleting databases. They're corrupting network links. They're breaking things in production while you're watching it all the time, 24/7. They do that with a set of software agents that they call chaos monkeys. Netflix only has one environment, production. There are no test environments, there are no development environments because they don't need them. And that environment is so robust, so adaptable, that they can test it constantly by throwing their own chaos monkeys at it to break it, and it does not break, and you watch it and you don't know. This is the extreme end of the cost of failure understood grok. Thank you, I'm going to exploit that spectrum. And it is what you should be attempting to achieve within your own startup. All right, let's quickly talk about a tool that you can use to reflect these same kinds of pattern recognition approaches onto money. And I'm going to make you aware of something. Again, step outside the matrix. See it, Neo. Who's heard of this three-letter buzzword? NPV. What does it mean? Net present value. All right, I won't ask you because it's too loud here to tell me what it means, but in general what this is an investment forecasting tool. It's a way of looking at a potential investment. You measure the cash flows over time. If you get a number here that's greater than 1, good investment, go for it. Less than 1, don't do it. It's that simple. It's a really simple tool to use. It's in Excel. It's in Google Sheets. What's going on? What happened there? What's going on? What am I doing? This is what I'm doing. Guess what? There's more than one version. Why is that important? These particular 2 versions that I picked out, one is for the net present value of assets that you're going to purchase, and one is for the net present value of assets that you're going to lease. So hands up now, come on, you're a startup. How many of you are building those data centers? It's cold here in Finland. Seriously, you're building a data center? Oh, right, sorry. That would have been really cool. No, you're not. And in fact, for at least 5 years, if you go to the Valley and you go into an investor briefing and you say, dude, I'm buying some servers, they'll go, dude, see you later. Get the fuck out of here, right? You don't buy anything that you don't have to. Everything you're doing in your business is this one leased. You're not doing this one, you're doing this one. Guess what? There's only one in Excel. Which one do you think it is? It's the wrong one. Guess what? People who knew that already have a competitive advantage over you because they're measuring their business the right way. They stepped outside the matrix. They saw that black cat, and they're cooking with Crisco. You're not. Patterns. deep underneath everything we do. And being able to think in a constant mode of recognizing the patterns and asking questions about why is essential to being a unicorn. Makes a big difference to your business. All right, let's see some more examples. Who's heard of this distinction? Microservices. Heard that buzzword? Yay! All right. Now, I want somebody to shout it out as loud as it is here. Tell me why. Why microservices? Why is that new? Why is that the new black and monolithic isn't anymore? Why? Any guesses? There's lots of answers. Man, it's a lot cooler. It's what Google's doing. Isn't that how Facebook does things? Yeah, that's true, but is that the why? Not really. It's because of, you know, these things, man. Yeah, well, no, that's not the why either. It's true that every single logo on this slide is about microservices, but that's not the why. Why? It's about cost of failure. Look, man, if that big monolithic thing fails, guess what? Everything fails. One of these little bubbles fails, guess what? Well, those little bubbles failed. Guess which one of these is how Netflix works? Guess how those chaos monkeys are even possible? Who knows, on average, what the lifetime, the span of time that a typical virtual server that Netflix uses is uptime for a Netflix server? Any guesses? 10. Wow. I like you. No, I don't think they're there yet. They might be, but that's not the publicly available time. No. The most recent published number I saw was 37. 37 minutes. No virtual machine is ever alive for more than, on average, 37 minutes at Netflix. Because they don't need to be. That's how they're optimizing their cost curves. And they can only do that because the lifetime of that server means nothing to them. Who's heard of these buzzwords here, these terms? REST and adios. Hey, that's more than 0 hands. Again, that's good. Can anyone tell me what they mean? What does REST mean? Anybody know? Representational state transfer. Man, I wish I had a prize. Can you do adios? Adios is hypertext as the engine of application state. This sounds really exciting, doesn't it? No, not really. So this really good-looking dude right here, he invented HTTP. Not a big deal. And a couple of years after he invented it, he looked around the world around him and thought, and he decided, I need to understand this better. So he wrote a dissertation for his PhD that describes the architecture of the web that sprang up around the protocol that he'd written, unwittingly. And he called the architecture of the web representational state transfer, and that's what this paper is about. Inside of it, he describes how you, as a developer, should be using the architecture of the web to step outside the matrix and lower your cost of failure. It's called the hypertext as engine of application state. And that acronym probably wins the World Species Award for the ugliest and stupidest acronym ever. So there's, you know, a fertile industry of trying to come up with better acronyms for it. This is the one I like. Hyper-driven, media-driven architecture. But it doesn't really matter. The point is, go read the dissertation. Because it's a tool that you can use to seize competitive advantage and step outside the matrix. If you don't know how the web works, then you're an unwitting consumer of it, not a neo exploiting it for your powerful purposes. Once you begin down this path, there is no going back. And you must begin to understand things like Newtonian time is a bug, not a feature. Who's heard the buzzword eventual consistency? Non-zero hands again. That's good. Good crowd. Eventual consistency is a database term, and it describes this notion that Newtonian time is a bug, not a feature. What do we mean by that? Well, Einstein, fairly insignificant person in the history of the species, realized that time was relative, came up with that cool thing, theory of relativity. But in computer science, we ignored it. Wrote all our textbooks, wrote all our frameworks, wrote, Linux, Unix, ZOS on the mainframes, as if that wasn't true. Not so clever. But every problem is an opportunity. So the people who understand that, hey, actually it's not, time is relative, we're able to come up with ways to exploit it for great power. Who's heard the buzzword NoSQL? Hey, guess what? NoSQL. The why of it underneath, which is the thing I'm trying to teach you how to begin to see, is that Newtonian time is a bug, not a feature. It was about realizing that actually, no, trying to coordinate those transactions in this manner, that's not going to work. Oracle really sucks. There must be a better way to do this. Why is this not working? It seems to be something about timestamps. I don't understand. I thought it was about SQL. No, it's about these timestamps, man. Oh, wait, I see. And boom, off they go, creating MongoDB or whatever. I've tried to come up with ways to cook this down for you, to make it a little more digestible, and to give you some pointers along the way to start looking for things like this. And then I tried, you know, because I was trying to be clever, to map it back to the hairball thing that I talked about at the beginning. Didn't quite work. So I'm picking the R and the S and the E out of the hirsute word, which is a kind of obscure English word for being very hairy, like Wolverine. And I'm trying to map it from new world concepts to old world concepts. And I did these slides, and I've been doing this talk for about a year, and it took that long before somebody came up to me and said, dude, the map's not the territory. And I went, huh? And he went, dude, you're a native English speaker. Yeah. Your formula, the one you were talking about, you know, you spent like an hour talking about that really boring formula. Yeah. The right-hand side of it was the cool bit. Yeah. You read left to right. Yeah. You put the stuff on this slide the wrong way around, man. Oh, fuck. And I did. So on this slide now, all of a sudden, the interesting stuff is on the left and the boring stuff is on the right rather than the other way around, because I fell for a thinking trap. And this is what you need to try to get out of as a startup. You need to be trying to constantly challenge your own brain to step outside the matrix and see new things. So on this side, you've got all this boring stuff that an investor might ask you about. You know, tell me about your business continuity plan. And if you're one of these unicorn-like things ready to step outside the matrix and exploit that knowledge for great power and wealth, you should be able to respond with, dude, I just grow another arm. I just grow another arm. And then you explain how and how fast you can grow it. Because that is the way to success. Now, I'll leave you with two more things. I'm going to do two more things because I'm not really Steve Jobs and I don't wear a turtleneck. So number one, stigmergy. Have you heard that term before? Biological term. It's basically about a manner of signaling. Ants use it when they're, you know, going from a piece of food, and they leave pheromones behind so the other ants know where to go. No ant ever tells another ant, dude, go this way. They just leave a signal behind, like a breadcrumb, and other ants follow it. That's a stigmergic pattern. It's basically a way for you to do emergent cooperation. Why is that significant? Because your job as a C-level leader in your team is to leave those signals. This is tightly correlated with success at the startups that we look at. If you're trying to build a culture where you're constantly turning around and saying, dude, do this. That's not the matrix way. What you want to be doing is leaving signals behind that your team comes along behind you, gathers up, and they go off and do things autonomously the best they can. And it's your job as a leader to send those signals, to leave stigmergic signals behind that other people in your team can just follow. And finally, because I talked bad about maps at the beginning, I wanted to talk something nice about maps at the end. This is a particular kind of map done by a friend of mine named Simon Wardley, and you should Google this. When a map is a good one, when it's serving a purpose, what does it do? It tells me two things. It tells me where I am, so situational awareness tells me where I am in relation to other things. I'm right and smack in the middle of the Google booth at Slush, and everything else is around me in the following manner. And it shows me where to go. So it shows me situational awareness and motion. Where to go. It's not a static thing, a map. Simon's maps are a very powerful way for you to draw your business in a way that maps out where you are in relation to your competitors, your resources, your investors, and where you want to go, which things you want to disrupt, which things you want to just consume. And it forces you to think about that in a very powerful way. So this is the final tool that I want to give you. So risk exposure formula. Think about patterns of things that you think are working that probably aren't, like the NPV formula. Be stigmergic, and go do some Wardley maps. And if you weren't here for the first talk, please go sign up for Google's Launchpad program for startups, which is free, and which will give you all kinds of resources like talking to me on a fairly regular basis and going to talks like this one. Thanks very much.